The evening was quiet, filled with the soft hum of conversations and the gentle clinking of glasses. The town's community hall had never looked so grand. Warm yellow lights reflected off polished wooden floors, and a scent of fresh flowers filled the air. People were dressed in their best clothes, men in suits, women in elegant dresses. Everyone seemed to belong there, except for one person who stood quietly by the serving table, trying not to draw attention. She was a simple woman named Martha. Her hands were slightly worn from years of working in a small bakery just down the street. The lines on her palms told stories of hard work, not luxury. Her dress was plain and neatly pressed, but it couldn't hide that she wasn't one of the wealthy guests. Still, she had been asked to help serve desserts that night. She was grateful for the chance, even if it meant standing in the corner unnoticed. Martha didn't come from much. Her life was quiet, predictable. She woke early every morning to knead dough and bake bread before the sun came up. Most people in town knew her by her pastries, not her name. She was kind, polite, and always smiling, even when tired. But behind that calm smile was a woman who had once dreamed big, dreams that had long been buried under the weight of daily survival. The charity gala was meant to raise money for a new community center. Everyone in town's upper circle was there. Business owners, teachers, even the mayor. They chatted about vacations, cars, and their children's colleges. Martha listened quietly as she refilled trays of cookies and slices of cake. Sometimes she nodded politely if someone looked her way, but mostly people didn't notice her at all. At one table near the front, a group of guests laughed loudly, the kind of laughter that came from confidence and comfort. They had been drinking wine, and their voices carried across the room. One woman whispered something about Martha's simple dress, and the group chuckled. Martha pretended not to hear. She'd learned long ago to ignore the small cruelties people sometimes throw without thinking. Still, there was something inside her that ached. She didn't want to be pitied or mocked. She just wanted to belong, even for a moment. As she walked toward the piano to place a tray of pastries on the nearby table, she paused for a second. The piano was an old grand model, beautiful, polished, and elegant. Its lid was half open, and she could see the strings inside glimmering under the light. A memory stirred deep within her. She used to sit at a piano just like this one when she was young. Her mother had saved for months to afford a used keyboard, just so Martha could practice. Back then, music was her escape. Whenever life got too hard, the piano became her world. But that was many years ago. Life changed. Her mother got sick and dreams had to wait. She sold the piano to pay for medicine. Since then, she never played again. She told herself it was fine, that dreams were for people who had time and comfort. She had neither. The host of the evening, a tall man in a shiny black suit, tapped his glass to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said proudly, "thank you for being here tonight. We have food, music, and most importantly, generosity. Let's make this night one to remember." Everyone clapped and cheered. Then someone shouted from the crowd, "When's the music starting?" The host smiled awkwardly. "Our pianist is running late," he said. "But don't worry. I'm sure he'll be here any moment." People murmured, glancing at the empty piano. A few shrugged it off, but some began joking to fill the silence. "Maybe someone else can play," a man said with a grin. "Any volunteers?" A few people laughed. Their eyes scanned the room, landing on Martha, who was standing quietly by the dessert table again. "What about her?" Another voice said teasingly. "She's been staring at the piano all night." The group chuckled. Martha froze, unsure what to say. The host tried to laugh it off. "Come now, she's here to help serve, not perform." But the teasing continued. "Oh, come on, let's have some fun. Let's see what the bakery lady can do." The laughter grew louder. Martha's face turned red. She wanted to disappear. Every eye in the room seemed to be on her now. She opened her mouth to say something polite, but no words came out. The host looked uncomfortable. "You don't have to," he said gently. Martha forced a small smile. "It's all right," she said softly. "I don't mind." Her voice was calm, but her heart was racing. She didn't know why she said yes. Maybe it was pride. Maybe she was tired of being looked down on. Maybe deep down she just missed the feeling of touching those keys again. She walked slowly toward the piano. The laughter faded into whispers. A few guests exchanged amused looks, expecting a clumsy performance. Someone whispered, "This should be interesting." Martha sat down on the bench. The piano felt cold and unfamiliar beneath her fingertips. For a moment she simply stared at the keys. her reflection faintly visible in their smooth surface. Her hands trembled slightly. It had been so long. She pressed one key, softly. The sound was pure, clear. Something inside her stirred again. She took a deep breath, placed both hands on the keys and closed her eyes. The room went still. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Martha didn't start playing right away. She just sat there, breathing, remembering. The laughter, the bakery, the long mornings, the tired evenings, all faded from her mind. In their place came memories of her mother's voice saying, "Play, my dear. Let your heart speak." And for the first time in years, she felt that old warmth returning. She didn't know if she could still play like before, but something told her she had to try, not for them, but for herself. The guests waited impatiently. A few snickered under their breath.
"Any time now," someone whispered. Martha heard them, but she didn't care.
Her fingers hovered above the keys, ready to awaken something long forgotten. Her heart pounded in her chest. The hall, the people, the laughter, all blurred into the background. At that moment, it was just her and the piano. And as the seconds ticked by, no one realized that they were about to witness something they would never forget. The room was quiet now. All the laughter and chatter had faded into an uneasy silence. People stood still, their eyes fixed on the woman sitting at the grand piano. Some crossed their arms, waiting for what they thought would be an awkward attempt. Others whispered, unable to hide their smirks. Martha took another deep breath. Her hands rested on the piano keys, but she didn't play yet. She could feel the weight of every stair in the room pressing down on her shoulders. Her palms were slightly damp, her heart beating so fast that she thought everyone could hear it. She had played piano years ago, so many years that it almost felt like another life. Back then, music was her whole world. She could spend hours practicing without noticing the time passing, but life had taken her down a different path, one that didn't include beautiful stages or shining lights. It had been filled with bills, work, and survival. Now here she was again, sitting in front of a piano in a room full of strangers who didn't believe in her. Her fingers trembled as they pressed down on the first few keys. A soft sound filled the air, a gentle, uncertain note that echoed through the hall. For a second, no one reacted. Then someone chuckled quietly from the back. Martha ignored it. She tried again. Another note. Then another. The melody came slowly, like a fragile memory returning after years of silence. She started with something simple, a song she used to play as a child, one her mother had taught her. It was hesitant at first, uneven, but as her hands moved, the rhythm began to find itself. Her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. The crowd that had been whispering moments ago now stood a little quieter. Something about the way she touched the keys, so carefully, so delicately, felt different. It wasn't just someone pressing random notes. It was someone speaking through music. Martha's eyes closed. She wasn't in that fancy hall anymore. In her mind, she was back in her small home as a young girl, sitting at a second-hand piano, her mother beside her, smiling proudly. The memory brought a warmth to her heart, and suddenly the fear melted away. Her fingers moved more confidently now. The melody grew stronger, richer. The room seemed to breathe with her music. The guests, who had been so ready to laugh, began to listen instead. For the first time that night, no one said a word. Even the waiter stopped moving. The notes flowed like a story, soft and gentle, then powerful and full of emotion. It was as if she was telling her life through the piano, every joy and sorrow hidden inside each sound. The people who had mocked her earlier now looked at each other, unsure what to think. The same woman they had teased just minutes ago was creating something so beautiful that it made their chests tighten. The song grew deeper, more emotional. Each note seemed to pull at something invisible inside everyone listening. Martha's hands moved quickly now, effortlessly gliding across the keys. Her head tilted slightly with each phrase, her face calm, almost peaceful. When she played the higher notes, it felt like light breaking through clouds. When she played the lower tones, it was as if the earth itself was speaking. She had forgotten what it felt like, to be one with the instrument, to lose herself completely in the music. For those few minutes, there were no bills, no bakery, no judgmental glances. There was only her heart, and it was wide open. A few people in the audience blinked in disbelief. They had expected a clumsy attempt, maybe a few wrong notes, a moment of embarrassment. Instead, they were witnessing something they couldn't explain. A woman near the front placed her hand on her chest. The melody reminded her of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Another guest quietly whispered to his friend, "She's incredible." Martha didn't hear any of it. She wasn't playing for them. She was playing for herself, for her younger self who had once believed that music could heal anything. The song slowed, fading into a quiet, tender ending. The last note hung in the air like a sigh, delicate and trembling. Then for a long moment there was silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights above. Martha finally opened her eyes. For a second she looked unsure, almost shy. She had forgotten there were people watching her. She turned her gaze toward the crowd, half expecting laughter or polite claps. But everyone was frozen, stunned. Then slowly someone began to clap. Another followed. And then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause, real, loud, honest applause. People were smiling now, not with arrogance, but with awe. Martha blinked, not quite believing what she was seeing. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something. But no words came out. She gave a small, modest nod and started to stand up. But before she could step away, the host came forward, clapping louder than anyone else. That, he said breathlessly, was absolutely beautiful. The audience cheered again. Some even whistled. A few had tears in their eyes. Martha didn't know what to do. She wasn't used to attention. She smiled politely and stepped back from the piano, trying to make herself small again. The same people who had mocked her earlier now looked embarrassed. A man near the back rubbed his neck awkwardly, whispering, "I didn't know she could actually play." The woman who had laughed the loudest before now avoided eye contact, but none of that mattered to Martha. What mattered was how she felt inside. It had been years since she felt that alive. The applause slowly faded, replaced by a warm, lingering energy in the room. People started talking again, but this time their voices were filled with admiration instead of mockery. Martha went back to her corner, where the trays of desserts waited. Her hands were still shaking slightly, not from fear anymore, but from emotion. One of the waiters walked up to her quietly. "That was amazing," he said with a genuine smile. "I didn't know you could play like that." Martha smiled softly. "Neither did I," she admitted. The night carried on, but something had shifted. People kept glancing toward her, whispering to each other with newfound respect. The woman they had ignored had somehow become the heart of the evening. As she packed up the remaining pastries later that night, she couldn't help but smile. She hadn't expected anything from that night, not praise, not applause. She had only wanted to be kind, to blend in quietly, but life had other plans. Walking home under the pale streetlights, Martha felt lighter than she had in years. She looked up at the sky and let out a soft laugh. It wasn't about showing off or proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering who she was. And as the cold night breeze brushed against her face, she whispered to herself, "Maybe it's not too late after all." For a long time after the applause faded, the sound of that piano still lingered in the air like it didn't want to leave. People were still talking about it, even as dinner was served and the music from the speakers resumed. The melody she had played stayed in their minds, soft but unforgettable. Martha quietly returned to her corner, hoping the attention would fade. She wasn't used to eyes following her like this. All her life she had been the one serving others, not the one being applauded. The sudden shift made her both proud and shy. She could still feel the warmth in her hands from the piano keys. It was like the music had woken something inside her that had been sleeping for too long. She tried to keep herself busy by collecting empty plates and glasses. A few guests stopped her to thank her for the performance. Their voices were full of genuine admiration. "That was beautiful," one said softly. "You have a real gift." Another added, "I didn't expect that at all." Martha smiled each time but didn't know what to say. Compliments weren't something she received often. A few minutes later, the host approached her again. He looked both curious and impressed. "You know," he said, "I've hosted this event for years, but I've never seen the room go that quiet before. You completely stole the show." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "I didn't mean to," she said. "I just wanted to help." "Help?" he said, smiling. "You did more than that. You gave everyone something to remember." Before she could reply, another man joined the conversation. He was older, with gray hair and kind eyes. He introduced himself politely and mentioned that he worked with local musicians. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. Martha hesitated. "A long time ago," she said softly. "My mother taught me. We had an old piano when I was young. I used to practice every day, but life got in the way." The man nodded with understanding. "It has a way of doing that," he said gently. "Still, talent like yours doesn't just disappear, it sleeps. And when you played tonight, it woke up." His words touched her more deeply than she expected. She thanked him quietly and went back to work. But as she walked away, his words stayed in her mind. "It sleeps. And when you played tonight, it woke up." All through the rest of the evening, people kept looking at her differently. Not as a server, not as a woman in a plain dress, but as someone special. Some even asked if she performed anywhere. Martha could only smile and say no. She hadn't played in front of anyone in decades, and this night had been a surprise to her as much as to them. When the event finally ended, she helped clean up the hall. The host offered to arrange a ride home for her, but she politely refused. The night air felt too calm, too beautiful to rush away from. She wanted to walk. Outside, the streets were quiet, with only the soft glow of the streetlights and the distant sound of crickets. Martha walked slowly, her mind full of thoughts. She remembered her mother's voice, her laughter, and the way she used to clap after every song, no matter how many mistakes Martha made. Those were the happiest moments of her childhood. She stopped near the small park where she often passed on her way home. There was an old bench under a tree. She sat down for a while, looking at the sky. The stars were faint but visible. She let out a deep sigh. What was that? She whispered to herself. Why did I feel so alive up there? She hadn't felt this kind of joy in years. Baking was her livelihood, but it wasn't her passion. The piano had always been the part of her that made her feel alive. Maybe she had buried that part too soon. Her eyes watered a little as she thought about how her mother used to encourage her. "Never stop playing," her mother would say. "Even if no one listens, play for yourself." But she had stopped. She had forgotten that promise. Until tonight. The next morning, Martha woke earlier than usual. She had barely slept, but she didn't feel tired. She kept replaying the sound of the piano in her head. It was as if the notes were still following her, whispering reminders of who she used to be. She got ready for work and went to the bakery. The smell of fresh bread filled the air as she opened the doors. The same routine began: the dough, the oven, the customers. But she was different now. There was a new lightness in her movements, a quiet excitement in her chest. Around noon, as she served a customer, she noticed someone standing outside the shop window. It was the older man from the gala, the one who had said her talent had been sleeping. He walked in with a friendly smile. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he said. "I just wanted to talk for a moment." "Of course," she said, wiping her hands. "Would you like some coffee?" He nodded, and they sat at one of the small tables by the window. He told her he hadn't stopped thinking about her performance. "You have something rare," he said. "A gift that deserves to be shared." Martha laughed lightly, shaking her head. "I'm just a baker," she said. "I don't think people would care to hear me play." He smiled. "You'd be surprised who's waiting to be moved by real music." Then he handed her a small card. "I run a local arts center," he explained. "We hold community concerts every month. No pressure, but I'd love for you to perform there." "Just one song." Martha stared at the card. She didn't know what to say. Her first instinct was to refuse. The idea of performing in front of people again scared her. But at the same time, a small spark of excitement flickered inside her chest. "I don't know if I can," she admitted honestly. The man smiled kindly. "You already did," he said. "Last night." After he left, Martha sat quietly for a while, the card still in her hands. She thought about the hall, the applause, and the feeling of her fingers dancing over the keys. Maybe this was a sign, a gentle push from life, telling her that it wasn't too late to start again. That evening, when the bakery closed, Martha didn't go straight home. Instead, she stopped by a small music shop she hadn't visited in years. Through the window, she saw pianos, guitars, and violins neatly lined up. The sight filled her with both longing and nervousness. She stepped inside. The owner, an elderly woman with glasses, greeted her warmly. "Looking for something special?" Martha smiled softly. "Just looking," she said. But her eyes went straight to a used upright piano in the corner. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its own quiet way. She ran her fingers over the keys, pressing one softly. The sound filled the shop, familiar and comforting. The owner noticed the emotion on her face. "You play?" she said knowingly. "I used to," Martha replied. "Well," the woman said, smiling gently, "maybe it's time to start again." Martha looked down at the piano, then back at the woman. Something inside her clicked. She asked about the price. It wasn't cheap, but she could make it work if she saved for a few weeks. As she walked home that night, the moon hung low in the sky, and for the first time in many years, Martha felt a spark of purpose she thought she had lost forever. That night she lay in bed wide awake. She thought about the gala, the people, the music, and the invitation. Her mind was full of possibilities she hadn't dared to dream in years. She didn't know where this would lead. But she knew one thing for sure. Something had changed inside her. The music was no longer sleeping, it was alive again. The next few days passed in a blur for Martha. She went about her routine at the bakery, kneading dough and filling trays with bread and pastries, but her mind kept wandering back to the piano. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear the notes she had played at the gala, feel the cool, smooth keys beneath her fingers, and remember the warmth that spread through her chest as the audience listened. It wasn't just the music she remembered. It was the way she had felt alive, the way the room had held its breath for a moment, waiting for her to finish. That memory gave her a strange mix of fear and excitement. Could she really do it again? Could she perform for people who weren't expecting her? People who didn't know her story? She found herself thinking about the card the older man had given her. The invitation to play at the local arts center had been simple, polite, and encouraging, but it carried weight. She hadn't said yes yet. In fact, the first instinct she had was to set it aside, pretend it didn't exist. After all, she was a baker, not a performer. She had responsibilities, a routine, a life that didn't leave room for dreams. But then she thought about her mother. The way she used to watch Martha play with pride in her eyes. The way she had always said that music was a gift meant to be shared. That thought stayed with her, tugging at her heart. She realized that denying herself this opportunity wasn't just about fear. It was about losing a part of herself she hadn't felt in years. So she made a decision. She would accept the invitation. Not because she wanted fame, not because she wanted applause, but because it was time to honor that part of her that had been waiting patiently all these years. The next morning, after finishing her bakery shift, she walked toward the music shop she had visited a few nights ago. The piano she had looked at before still sat in the corner, calling to her. She pressed her fingers gently on the keys, feeling the familiar resistance, the slight weight of each note. It felt right. She had to have it. She knew it wasn't a grand concert piano, but it didn't matter. This piano was hers now, a chance to play again, to practice, to grow. Purchasing the piano wasn't easy. She had to save for weeks, doing extra shifts at the bakery, cutting back on little comforts, but she never once regretted it. Every time she pressed the keys, every time she played a simple tune, she felt that spark she had felt at the gala return a little stronger. Evenings became her time. While the town settled into quiet, she practiced. At first, the music was hesitant, cautious. Years of not playing had dulled her fingers. Her confidence wavered. But each day, as her hands grew familiar with the keys again, the music began to flow more naturally. It was as though the piano had been waiting for her all these years, ready to bring back the woman it knew she could be. Word about the gala performance had spread quietly in the town. People still talked about the simple woman who had stunned them all with her unexpected talent. Some came to the bakery not just for bread, but hoping to meet her, to see the woman who had brought music to life. They didn't all understand her story, but they respected her presence, her quiet strength, and the gentle way she had held herself when she performed. One afternoon, while she was arranging pastries in the display case, a small group of children came in. They pointed excitedly toward her and asked if she could play for them. Martha smiled softly. She hadn't played for anyone outside the music center yet, but she couldn't resist the eager eyes of the children. She took them to the back of the bakery, where a small upright piano stood as a decorative piece for special occasions, and she played a few simple tunes. The children clapped and cheered, their innocent joy filling her heart with warmth. She realized that this was what she had missed the most, not the applause from strangers or the recognition, but the simple happiness that music could bring to people's lives. That was the true gift. The invitation from the Arts Center loomed over her. The day to perform was approaching, and she began to feel the nerves she had thought she had left behind. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she forgot the music? What if the audience didn't care? These questions ran through her mind late at night, keeping her awake. But then she remembered the moment at the gala when she had closed her eyes and let the music carry her. The applause, the awe, the silence that had followed her last note, it all reminded her that she could do it again. She wasn't alone. The music was with her. It had never left her. She decided to prepare a piece she had composed herself years ago, but never had the courage to play in front of anyone. It was a melody filled with hope, longing, and quiet strength. Each time she played it, her heart soared, and the notes seemed to weave together the story of her life, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the quiet victories she had experienced. When the night of her first Arts Center performance arrived, Martha felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. She walked into the hall, the upright piano set in the middle of the stage, facing the small but eager audience. Her heart raced as she saw familiar faces from the town mixed with strangers who had come to hear local talent. For a moment, she almost turned back, retreating to the safety of her familiar life. But then she felt the weight of her mother's encouragement, the memories of the gala and the joy of every evening spent practicing alone. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. The hall fell silent, waiting. Martha closed her eyes and let her fingers move. At first, the music was soft, cautious, like a bird testing its wings. But soon the melody grew stronger, more confident. The notes rose and fell, telling a story without words, carrying the audience along on a journey of emotion. People leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the music. Some had tears in their eyes, some whispered to each other in wonder, and others simply sat quietly, absorbing every sound. Martha's fingers moved with grace and precision, her heart guiding each note. She had not played for years, yet the music felt as natural as breathing. As she played, she felt herself transforming. The shy, simple woman who had been forced to play at a gala was gone. In her place was someone who had found her voice, her purpose, and her courage. The audience felt it too, the energy, the honesty, the passion. When she finished, there was a pause. The silence was heavy, filled with awe and disbelief. Then slowly the applause began. It was soft at first, then growing louder, until the entire hall erupted in cheering and clapping. Martha opened her eyes, smiled, and bowed. Her heart was racing, but it was full of joy. For the first time in her life, she realized that music was not just a dream or a memory. It was a part of who she was. And now she was ready to share it with the world. The morning after her first performance at the Arts Center, Martha woke up feeling lighter than she had in years. The applause, the soft whispers of admiration, the faces of people moved by her music, all of it stayed in her mind, replaying like a warm, comforting song. She felt a quiet pride, not because she had impressed anyone, but because she had finally allowed herself to shine. At the bakery, things felt different. People greeted her with warmer smiles, some even stopping by to talk about her performance. They asked questions not just about her music, but about her life, her story. Martha answered them humbly, not used to the attention, but grateful for the connection. She realized that her music had not only moved people, it had opened a door for them to see her as more than a baker, more than a quiet, simple woman. That afternoon, she received a phone call that she hadn't expected. It was the Arts Center manager, speaking with excitement in his voice. "We had so many people asking about you," he said. "They want you to perform again, this time for a larger audience. Would you consider it?" Martha hesitated, the familiar fear rising in her chest. The thought of performing for even more people made her palms sweat. But then she thought about the children who had clapped in the bakery, the faces of the audience at the Arts Center, the way her mother's encouragement had never truly left her. She realized that this was not about proving herself to anyone. It was about sharing her gift, giving a part of herself that had been waiting patiently for so long. "Yes," she said softly. "I would like to try." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Martha dedicated every evening to practice, composing new pieces and refining her older ones. Each night she sat at the piano, letting her fingers glide over the keys, feeling the music flow from her heart. She was no longer nervous or hesitant. Each note she played carried confidence, emotion, and the wisdom of someone who had experienced life in its fullest depth. Word about her performances continued to spread. People from neighboring towns began to hear her name. They were curious about the simple woman who had touched so many hearts with her music. Newspapers and local radio stations asked to cover her story, fascinated by the transformation from humble bakery worker to talented pianist. Martha was hesitant at first, unsure if she wanted the attention, but she knew she could use this opportunity to inspire others, to show that talent and dreams don't belong to a select few. They can exist in anyone, anywhere, waiting for the right moment. Finally, the night of her next performance arrived. The auditorium was packed. Friends, neighbors, children from the bakery, and even people she had never met filled the seats. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the audience. Martha stepped onto the stage, carrying herself with a quiet confidence that surprised even her. The piano awaited her, polished and shining under the stage lights, and for the first time she didn't feel fear. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her hands fall onto the keys. The first notes were soft, gentle, inviting the audience into her world. Then slowly the melody grew richer, more complex. It was a story without words, one that spoke of struggle, hope, and triumph. She played pieces she had composed, notes that carried years of emotion, longing, and quiet joy. Every chord resonated with the audience, and she could feel their hearts following her music, breathing with her rhythm. As she played, she glanced up at the audience. She saw tears in some eyes, smiles on others, and a quiet reverence throughout the hall. People who had once underestimated her or doubted her were now witnessing something extraordinary. It was not just her technical skill that moved them. It was the authenticity, the soulfulness of her music. It spoke to something deeper than words could reach. After the final note lingered in the air, the hall was silent for a brief moment. Then the applause erupted, louder, more heartfelt than anything she had ever experienced. People stood up, clapping and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. Martha felt her own eyes fill with emotion, overwhelmed by the warmth and love surrounding her. The manager of the Arts Center approached her, his eyes shining. "You have no idea how much people needed to hear this," he said. "You've touched so many hearts tonight." Martha smiled, humbled. "I only play what I feel," she said softly. "If it reaches them, then that is enough." After the concert, people came forward to speak with her. They shared their own stories of struggle, dreams, and moments of despair, telling her how her music had reminded them of hope. A teacher spoke about a student who had been shy and withdrawn, saying that her music could inspire him to find his own courage. A mother thanked her for showing her child that hard work and patience could lead to something beautiful. Martha realized that her music had become more than just notes and melodies. It had become a bridge between hearts. The audience didn't just hear her music. They felt it, carried in the quiet spaces between the keys and the pauses, in the emotion she poured into every chord. In the weeks that followed, Martha continued to perform. Each performance was different, each audience unique, yet the impact remained the same. People left her concerts with a sense of wonder, hope, and inspiration. She began to receive invitations to perform at larger events, even small festivals in nearby towns. Slowly, she became known not just for her skill, but for the sincerity and emotion she brought to her music. Through it all, Martha remained humble. She continued to work at the bakery, keeping her routine grounded in reality. But now her days were brighter, filled with purpose beyond the ordinary. The piano had become a companion, a way to express her innermost thoughts, her joys, her fears, and her love for life. One evening, after returning from a performance, she sat at her piano at home, the quiet room filled with the soft glow of a single lamp. She looked at her hands, calloused from baking and refined by music, and smiled. She realized that she had finally found a balance between her work, her passion, and her life. She was no longer just the simple woman who had been forced to play at a gala. She was a musician, a storyteller, and an inspiration. She thought about the people who had doubted her, laughed at her, or ignored her in the past. She didn't feel anger or resentment. Instead, she felt compassion and understanding. Life had brought her to this moment, and in some ways, she was grateful for those early experiences. They had shaped her, strengthened her, and prepared her for the courage she now had. Martha knew that her journey was far from over. There were more songs to write, more performances to give, and more hearts to touch. But she no longer feared the unknown. The music had taught her that even after years of silence, dreams could awaken. Even after doubt and hesitation, courage could emerge. And even the quietest, most overlooked people could shine brightly when given a chance. Her story began to inspire others. People who felt overlooked, ordinary or unseen, started to reach out to her. They shared their own dreams, their hidden talents, and the fears that held them back. Martha encouraged them, sharing her own journey, showing that it was never too late to pursue what truly mattered. The piano had given her more than music. It had given her confidence, purpose, and a renewed sense of self. It had reminded her that life could surprise you when you least expected it, that hidden gifts could emerge at the perfect moment, and that even the simplest of people could create something extraordinary. And as she played into the night, her music drifting through the quiet streets, Martha smiled to herself. She had been forced to play once, and in doing so, she had discovered the part of herself that was always meant to shine. The applause, the recognition, and the opportunities were wonderful, but they were not the true reward. The true reward was knowing that she had followed her heart, embraced her gift, and allowed herself to become the person she was always meant to be. Martha's life had changed forever, not because of the applause, but because she had remembered who she was, and in doing so reminded everyone else that sometimes the most extraordinary talents come from the most ordinary places. Her music would continue to touch lives, inspire hearts, and awaken dreams, and Martha would never stop playing. Not for fame, not for recognition, but for the sheer joy of being alive, and for the people who needed to feel, even for a moment, the beauty she carried within her. Months had passed since Martha's first performance at the Art Center. Life had changed in subtle but profound ways. She still worked at the bakery during the mornings, greeting familiar faces and preparing fresh bread and pastries, but her evenings were no longer empty. They belonged to her music, to the piano she had brought home, and to the small gatherings she had begun to play for. She had grown more confident with every note. Each evening, she experimented with melodies, allowing her feelings to guide her fingers. Sometimes the music was joyful and lively, reflecting the warmth of a bright afternoon or a happy memory. Other times it was soft and melancholic, echoing the moments of struggle and quiet reflection she had experienced over the years. The piano had become her companion, her confidant, and her way of expressing the emotions she rarely spoke aloud. One evening, as she played a new piece she had been working on, a soft knock came at the door. She paused, surprised, and went to open it. Standing there was a young woman from the town, holding a notebook in her hands, her eyes bright with curiosity and admiration. "I heard you perform last month," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to ask if you could teach me. I've always wanted to play the piano, but I never knew where to start." Martha smiled gently. She could see herself in the girl, the same nervous excitement, the same longing to connect with something bigger than herself. "Of course," she said softly. "I'd be happy to show you. Come in." The girl's eyes lit up. She followed Martha to the piano, and they spent hours together that evening. Martha showed her the basics, guiding her hands over the keys, helping her feel the music rather than just the notes. The girl's fingers trembled at first, but Martha encouraged her gently, reminding her that every great musician had once started this way. As the girl left later that night, Martha felt a quiet warmth inside her. She realized that her music was no longer just about her. It could inspire, teach, and uplift others. The gift she had rediscovered was multiplying, spreading beyond herself, touching lives in ways she had never imagined. News of Martha's talent continued to spread. Local newspapers featured her story, highlighting the transformation from a humble bakery worker to a pianist who captivated entire rooms with her music. Invitations arrived from nearby towns for performances, small community gatherings, and charity events. People were drawn not only to her skill, but to the authenticity she carried in every note she played. Despite the attention, Martha remained grounded. She never let the applause or recognition change who she was. She continued to wake early, bake bread, and greet her customers with the same kindness she had always shown. But now there was a new energy about her, a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose that radiated from her every movement. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail. It was an invitation to perform at a regional music festival. Martha stared at it for a long time, her heart racing. This was bigger than anything she had imagined. A festival meant a large audience, critics, and professionals who would judge her music. The thought was terrifying, but also exhilarating. She knew she couldn't turn it down. The weeks leading up to the festival were filled with preparation. Martha spent hours at her piano, perfecting her pieces, exploring new melodies, and experimenting with harmonies. She wanted every note to carry the depth of her experience, the struggles, the joys, the quiet victories. She wasn't playing just for herself anymore. She was playing for everyone who had ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or unseen. Finally, the day of the festival arrived. Martha traveled to the venue, a large hall buzzing with anticipation. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach, but it was different this time. It wasn't fear. It was excitement, a thrill that reminded her why she had chosen to embrace her music. Backstage, she looked around at the other performers. They were talented, confident, and polished. Martha felt a pang of doubt. Did she really belong here? Could a woman who had spent most of her life baking bread truly stand on this stage with them? Then she remembered the gala, the art center, and the children in the bakery. She remembered the joy of letting the music flow through her, and the way it had touched people's hearts. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and reminded herself that this wasn't about competing. It was about sharing. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage, the lights bright but not blinding. She approached the grand piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. The audience fell silent, curious to see the woman whose story had traveled far and wide. She pressed the first note softly, letting it resonate through the hall. Then another and another. The music began as a gentle whisper, drawing the audience in, pulling them closer to the story she was about to tell. With each passing moment, her confidence grew. The melody swelled, rising and falling with emotion. Every chord was deliberate, every pause meaningful. The audience could feel the depth of her experience, the journey that had brought her to this moment. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others sat forward, their hearts racing in time with the rhythm. Martha played not for recognition, not for applause, but for the pure love of music. She let the story of her life unfold through the keys, the challenges she had faced, the sacrifices she had made, and the quiet triumph of rediscovering her gift. When the final note hung in the air, the hall was silent for a heartbeat. Then, as if released all at once, the audience erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Martha smiled softly, her heart full, humbled by the response but not defined by it. After the performance, many people came to speak with her. They shared stories of how her music had inspired them, how it reminded them to hold on to their dreams no matter how impossible they seemed. Martha listened quietly, offering kind words and encouragement. She realized that her journey was no longer just her own. It had become a thread connecting countless lives, reminding everyone that talent, courage, and hope could emerge from the most unexpected places. As the festival ended and she returned home, Martha felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had faced her fears, embraced her gift, and shared it with the world. She had transformed not only her own life, but the lives of those who had heard her play. Sitting at her piano that night, Martha reflected on how far she had come. From a quiet woman serving pastries to a pianist whose music could move entire rooms, she had discovered something profound, that the power of following one's heart could change not only one's own life, but the lives of others. She began to play softly, the notes gentle in the stillness of her home. The music was for her, for the people she loved, and for anyone who needed to be reminded that beauty and talent often lie hidden, waiting for the right moment to shine. Martha knew that life would continue to bring challenges and uncertainties, but she also knew that she had found a way to face them, with courage, grace, and music. She had been forced to play once, and in doing so, she had uncovered the part of herself that was always meant to shine. The notes faded, and for the first time in her life, Martha felt truly free, fully alive and ready to embrace whatever came next, one note at a time.